Hi everyone, welcome to a video about reverse winching, which is the art of using a winch which normally would drag the vehicle forwards to actually drag the vehicle backwards. So in this video I'm going to explain how that works, some of the forces involved with a model but also in real life, and also run you through a real life recovery situation where I got myself out of trouble using a reverse winch, and talk about some practical tips about how you can use it when you're out four-wheel driving. Okay, so this is how reverse winching works. We've got our car and you need a few different anchor points. We're going to use 4 in this case. You run a winch line out towards your first anchor point, put a snatch block around it, and what we're doing here is we're just doing a redirect. The idea is to get the winch line to the back of the car. So that's why we run it up to a second anchor point, and now the winch line is at the back of the car. Next thing you do, you rig up a double line pull. So we go to the car, round the snatch block, back again, and there's our double line pull. That is the basics of a reverse winch. And what we have here is a single line pull at the front and a double line pull at the back, and the double line pull overpowers the single line pull, and that's why the vehicle goes backwards even though you're winching in forwards. Right, so here's our model. There's the winch at the front, and then we follow it up. I've actually got some scales here which are going to be acting as load cells, and that will tell us the load on each line. First redirect, second redirect, and then right at the back, that's our double line pull leading back to the vehicle. So here's where we're going to measure the forces. Point A is going to measure the amount of force the winch will have to generate to move the vehicle backwards, and point B will measure the amount of force required to actually drag the car backwards, and that should be a little bit more than A. Point C will be the load on the first redirect point, and D and E will be the forces at the rear. And there's a redirect right at the top as the diagram. I'm not going to worry about the force on that because it's going to be minimal. Okay, so we're ready to start winching. Now I've got the remote controlled Lego app here so I can operate the winch by Bluetooth. So all we're going to do now is switch on each of these scales here, and then that will show us the load at each of those points, and we can see what's going to happen. And we're now going to start to take up the slack. Now there's a fair bit of slack in this because it's so many different pulleys and ropes, but you can see there that we're beginning to start to pull. The tension's coming into the line now, and the vehicle's actually going backwards even though the winch line is pulling in forwards. And it's a kind of stop-start progress there for reasons we'll explain in a moment, but definitely that vehicle is going backwards despite the fact it's winching in forwards. Okay, so I've looked at the results, entered them into a spreadsheet and done all the maths, and let's see what it looks like. So there for reference was the setup that we had, and here's what the graph looks like. So we're going to start off with A. Now that is, as you can see there, the amount of force required by the winch, and it's a pretty spiky line, and the reason it's a spiky line is because what tends to happen is that the winch will pull in quite a bit of slack. It'll get a lot of slack out of the system. The car will jerk back a bit, and that will take a little bit of slack out, and then you sort of get this sort of slack, unslack, jerky behavior going back. So next line is B, and that is the force behind the car, which naturally is a little bit greater than at A, because otherwise the car wouldn't be moving backwards. There's got to be a difference between the two. Now you can see there exactly when the vehicle began to move, and that is when the force at B began to be greater than A, and that's at the red dotted line there. Otherwise it was just taking slack out of the system. Now the grey one, that's point C, and you can see that that's the first redirect, so that's significantly more force on that than actually the A1 or B, and then we've got point D here, which is greater again than the force at A or B, and finally the least force is actually at point E, which is the other side of the anchor. So all of that is as you'd expect, but if you wanted to rig this and then figure out approximate loads, then know that point C is going to be significantly highly loaded, and if you were to combine point D and E, that would actually be greater than point E, but if you split them out, then point C becomes the point of greatest load there. Okay, so let's put some forces on the diagram. Point A, that averaged out about 350. Now that was grams because it's only a model, but you can take it as relative forces. B, a bit greater than that, 400, and C, about double what A was at 700. Again, you'd expect that just being a redirect there. D was around 600, and E was averaging around 200. So that gives you an idea of relative forces. Okay, so now we're going to run a reverse winch with my Ranger, full-size four-wheel drive, weighing about 2,600 kilos. There's the setup. I've only got two load cells because they're really expensive, so I've just put one at the front and one at the back. Now I'm going to use the results of that to extrapolate based on the model, so I'll be able to figure out what the likely forces were around the rest of the system.
So here's the kit we're going to be using in the field to measure the forces on the Ranger. Those are two 12-ton load cells, which means that they will measure a load, as you pull those two apart, up to 12 tons. Now I'm using two of them because I don't believe it's possible to use only one and get exactly accurate loads, because there's too many variables involved in four-wheel drive recovery. I have tried to use one before. I think it's been accurate in some circumstances, but two's really the go. So the way it works is that the load is applied to the load cell, and then it gets reported on this app here in real time, and it's logged per second, and I can export that data and use it in Excel. So if I pull that like so, you can see that instantly there's a load there, and that's all recorded, and then easy to analyze the data in Excel. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of these in my videos. If you have any ideas as to what you'd like to see tested, let me know, but I'm pretty keen on putting some science, facts and logic into four-wheel drive recovery, because I don't really think there's been enough of that at the moment.
So here's the setup for the reverse winch. There's the load cell, and then we run that up to a snatch block, soft shackle, and then that comes back. Now this is where it kind of gets a bit tricky, because you've got to make sure that you dodge all the trees. That's a shortened tree trunk protector with a factor 55 snatch ring. Then we go up here to another tree trunk protector, snatch block, turn it round, and then we've got the other load cell there connected to the back of the Ranger. Double that back. Good thing we've got a 50-metre long line here, and just shortened it a bit using the X-locks, as you can see there, and another tree trunk protector to finish things off. So here's the tester. You can see the load cells being dragged in. Now the vehicle's on a slight incline, and the reason for that is that I wanted there to be some constant resistance all the way through. If it was on the flat, then it would get some momentum up and it would probably overrun. See there the load cell with remote Bluetooth capability, just measuring the load there. So I only dragged it back about 2 or 3 meters, but that was enough to be able to measure the forces, which were pretty significant. You may notice that the load cells started off on the ground, and that's because I wanted to set them to 0 for each time, and that's why there's also a tree trunk protector at the back of the car, so they started off on 0 there. So you can see that the progress backwards is a little bit jerky, as sort of you get the tension sort of change a little bit through the system, but we did enough to be able to get a good reading. Now you can also see here the jerkiness, and that's nothing to do with the factor 55 stuff. It's just the nature of the tension being built up and then kind of released a bit as the vehicle goes backwards. So there's a reverse winch. The winch at the front is dragging the line in, yet the vehicle is actually travelling backwards. Here we are pulling the Ranger straight back without a reverse winch, just so we can compare that baseline to the force required when we are doing a reverse winch. Okay, so let's take a look at the results then. So on the vertical axis we've got force, and then we've got time out the other one, and the blue line is the amount of force generated by the winch. You can see that peaked at about 1300 kilos there, and it's pretty spiky, as you can see, because of the tension in the line there, and the fact that you're sort of going to get force pulling forwards, and then that has to be overpowered by the force pulling you back. Now the purple line is the force which was pulling back, and you can see there that that's spiking consistently greater, but pretty much in line with the forward winch force. But this doesn't mean a huge amount unless we can put it against a baseline, and the baseline here is in grey, so that is the force required to pull the vehicle backwards, be that a straight winch, or in what we did was a tow. Now you can see that the time is less because we actually moved it a little bit quicker. It wasn't quite as slow as a double line pull, but that's not really important. What's important is the fact that the sort of peaked out at about the 300 kilogram maximum to move that vehicle over that distance in a straight pull, whereas reverse winching, the winch had to generate 1300 kilograms or so in order to move the vehicle over the same distance. So that's why reverse winching is a bit of a problem. The amount of force generated by the winch cannot be fully transmitted to moving the vehicle. Okay, so here's a question. Is it a 1-to-1 pull or 2-to-1 pull in terms of the amount of winch line coming in? Well, the answer, as you can see here, is that for every metre of line you pull in, you will move backwards 1 metre. So in terms of ratio of line to movement, it's 1-to-1, despite the fact you've got a 2-to-1 pull at the back. So here's the setup for the real life Ranger recovery. We've got a track, 2 wheels in a ditch, the vehicle's bogged, and there's a multitude of a variety of trees around the track, which is handy for anchor points. So run out a winch cable right first of all. I only run 20 metres on my drum, so that allows me to work at relatively high fleet angles and also ensure that there's never a lot of turns on the drum, so the winch operates at pretty good efficiency. So that's the winch line. We've got a shackle there connecting it to a winch extension rope of 50 metres. That goes through a snatch block, and then that allows us to redirect back. Because it's offset slightly, I only need 1 snatch block to get to the back of the vehicle. There's my 50 metre winch extension rope. Really handy to have that length. You can always shorten it, but it's hard to make it longer. So then we put a snatch ring at the back, redirect that back to the vehicle. We put another snatch ring there, and then bring that back to the same anchor point. Now that 50 metre winch extension rope was too long, so then I used an X-lock to shorten it. So that was the setup used to recover the vehicle. So here's the Ranger stuck. Now I just drove along this track, and when I found a rut that I could get myself stuck in, I just got myself stuck in it by driving in and then spinning the wheel a bit, and you can see hanging up on the diff there. So I didn't actually pay any attention as to whether I could reverse winch out of it or not, and that was kind of the point of the test. Get yourself stuck and then just try and get yourself out. Now if I didn't have the reverse winch, there's a whole heap of other ways I could have got myself unstuck. I was solo at the time, so I could have used my high lift to winch backwards, for example, dug it out, got my max tracks out, whatever. So I wasn't buttered about the reverse winch not working, but it was a genuine sort of drive along this track, get stuck, all right, now let's see what happens. So here's where I got myself stuck. Again, I wasn't looking for this to be a good reverse winch spot. I just saw that rut and got myself stuck. So I pulled out a lot of cable off the drum. I've only got 20 metres on it, so it doesn't take long to get it down to just 1 turn. There's the rope shortened with an X-Lock, that's my 50-metre winch extension rope. That's the first redirect there to get us to the back of the vehicle with an ARB snatch block. And you can see here I do have a bit of a fleet angle on, which isn't ideal, but that has allowed me just to use one block to get to the back of the vehicle. And you can see there that the rope does go through the undergrowth a bit, so I had to do a bit of clearing, and I actually did a bit more clearing after I've finished this shot, just to avoid damage to the winch rope when it rubs against things like tree stumps and branches. And 5-metre tree trunk protector there. And then we've got another pulley here, in this case a snatch ring, which takes us back to the vehicle. And it's this one here back at the vehicle that's important to be 180 degrees. And that's just connected to the back of the car, as you can see there. And then that's it, back to the other anchor point, and that's the setup completed. So you can't expect your 4,000 kilogram winch to actually generate 4,000 kilograms of reverse force, but what can you expect? So to find out, I put the model on a series of slopes, 10, 15, 20, up to 30 degrees, and modelled the force required on the straight pull and also the force required with a reverse winch. And then I cross-referenced that against the testing done with the Ranger to come up with a conclusion. So how much force can your winch actually generate if you pull yourself backwards? So based on my calculations with the model and with real life, both of which tallied up pretty nicely, I would say a good rule of thumb is to divide your winch capacity by 5. So if you have a 9,500 pound winch, that's about 2,000 pounds or maybe about 800, 900 kilograms. So you can imagine that your winch is only capable of pulling you about 900 kilograms, or about a fifth of that. Now, in reality, that's really not very much at all. You'd actually be better off winching yourself with even a high lift jack, and that's even before you put a double line pull on the high lift jack, or even a turf or anything else like that, but it might be enough to get yourself out of trouble. So if we take a average size four-wheel drive, maybe about 2.6 tons or thereabouts, a 900 kilogram pull would get you up a incline of probably 20 degrees in theory, assuming that that was an absolutely dead flat pull with no rolling resistance. Now in reality, with four-wheel driving, it's never going to be a completely perfect hard hill. You're going to have your tyre pressures down, there's going to be sticks and rocks and mud and so on. So realistically, you're probably able to winch up the equivalent of about maybe a 10-degree hill with a 9,500 pound winch. Now if you go for 12,000 pound, you can go a little bit further than that. Basically, reverse winching, the forces are such that It will drag you backwards, but not by much, and don't think of it as anything like equivalent as being a forward pull. Okay, so let's talk about the equipment you need if you're going to do reverse winching. The first thing you'll need is pulleys. Now these can either be a snatch block like this one or snatch rings like these. Doesn't matter, but you're going to need at least 3 of them, possibly 4 or more, depending on what sort of redirect you end up doing. The next essential is going to be a lot of winch rope. Now you can either put that on your drum, which I wouldn't recommend. I'd recommend keeping that relatively short, and then using a winch extension rope such as this one, because that gives you the ability to put it through a snatch block or across a snatch ring, whereas a winch extension strap does not. So you will need one of these. This one's a 50-meter one, and obviously that can be shortened as well. You can use something like this X-locks or whatever other means you've got to shorten a rope there. You're also going to need at least 2 anchor points, and that means 2 tree trunk protectors or whatever you use to anchor. So here's a 5-meter version, here's a 3-meter version, and again having a couple more of those is going to be pretty useful as well. And then you can't have enough soft shackles and metal shackles and everything else needed to put the thing together. One thing you can do if you really need to is actually use a shackle as kind of a pulley. Only use it for light redirects though. It's not great, but if you've got nothing else at all, then you can do a bit of a slight redirect using a metal shackle like that. So a lot of kit there, but I think with the advent of synthetic rope making everything really light and snatch rings, it's actually viable for you to carry this stuff here. Of course you could argue that you know, if you've got all of this kit across multiple vehicles, then someone else could drag you out anyway, and that's absolutely the case, but that's what you're looking at to do an effective reverse winch. Some tips for effective reverse winching. First one is reduce your recovery load. What I mean by that is make it as easy as possible for the vehicle to go backwards, and do whatever you can for that. Often that involves getting the shovel out and digging things out, using traction ramps like max tracks. Whatever the case may be, do everything you can to reduce that recovery load. Second point is make it easy for your winch, and there's 2 ways you can do that. One is pull as much winch cable out as you possibly can so that you've got the fewest turns on the drum, which means that your winch will be operating at maximum efficiency. Secondly, rig the winch so that you've got a fleet angle of very close to 0. So in other words, that the winch rope is coming out 90 degrees to the vehicle. Then also know where your loads are. So you've seen my force diagram there. You know that you're going to get a very high load on that first redirect point ahead of the vehicle, so plan for that accordingly. And if you do double up the 2 anchor points behind the vehicle, know that that's going to be a massively increased load as well. You do not want to be pulling over any trees. Now when you're actually winching, be aware that there's a lot of slack to take up because it's a long line. You've got at least 2 or at least 3 actually, maybe 4 or more anchor points there. It's going to take a while, and that tension's got to build up before the vehicle starts to move. So allow it that tension to build up, and don't be too scared if you winch for a while and nothing happens. And that, by the way, is another reason to pull a lot of line off your drum before you do reverse winching. And also ensure that the rear line is close to 180 degree pull, because the closer that is to 180 degrees, the closer it will be to a 2-to-1 mechanical advantage, and that's exactly what you need. What you're basically doing is ensuring that the pull at the back is stronger than the pull at the front, and to do that you've got to have your 2-to-1 mechanical advantage at the back, so get that as close to 180 degrees as you can. So I hope you learned something about reverse winching from this video, and if you've got any more ideas about what else you'd like to see me do with the load cells, let me know. I'm really just trying to put a lot of science, fact and measurements into, I guess, some of the mythology around four-wheel drive recovery, so any ideas on that are very welcome. Please obviously like and subscribe to my channel, and yeah, I'll keep the videos coming. Let me know what you think, and I hope to see you on the trail sometime.